California, that structure began to bog down. Why? Because this great diversity, this incredible diversity of all forms, not only creates either unique political issues or more intense versions of the issues found elsewhere, water, education, and so forth, but also that diversity is, in effect, the greatest impediment to resolving those issues. Why? Because on any given issue, and it doesn't matter what it is, it can be the budget, it can be health care, it can be water or whatever, there are myriad stakeholders that represent the incredible diversity of this state, number one. And when you try to bring those stakeholders together, you quickly learn that you don't need just consensus, you need unanimity. Because any stakeholder left out of any issue can and will use the checks and balances of our system, the very complex set of hurdles, to stop anything from happening. And we've seen that repeatedly. We saw, for example, the last major decision on water, made almost 3 decades ago, was opposed by some of those stakeholders, and they went to the ballot via referendum and killed the whole thing, and there has not been any basic decision on water since. We saw it occur a couple of years ago when the governor proposed a comprehensive health care plan. He tried to tweak it and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it to get that kind of political unanimity that was necessary for political passage. And the more he tried to tweak it, the further away he got from that kind of unanimity. Now, there are occasions, rarely, when we get that kind of unanimity. The last time I saw it was in 1996, when both houses of the legislature voted unanimously for a major policy decision called energy deregulation. It had been tweaked and tweaked and tweaked and tweaked to the point that all the major stakeholders said yes. And the legislature never stopped to say, what's the worst case scenario? What's the downside risk? Will this thing really work? No, they didn't care because all the groups had signed off on it, and therefore it must be a good thing. So really what happens in this system, given the dynamics of California and given the structure of the system, is that on any major issue, only 2 possible outcomes are available. One, you get that unanimity and you create, therefore, a monstrosity, like energy deregulation, an unworkable monstrosity, or like the last several budgets we've seen. Or, conversely, you don't get that, you can't tweak it enough to get that, and nothing happens, like on health care or like on water. So the problem isn't really which party's in charge or the particular little rules they deal with, whether it's term limits or 2/3 vote or whatever. It's really the basic fundamental structure of the government, a structure of government that basically gives no incentive whatsoever to come to conclusion and every incentive to delay. A system that is wonderful for passing the buck but has no authority and accountability. And so if we are going to fix this system, we have to design a system not for an 18th century agrarian society, but for a 21st century complex society, a system that provides more authority to act, fewer impediments that allow the minority to prevent action, and finally, accountability for those actions. Now, what system might work? Well, I don't know. How about a parliamentary system, for example? Maybe that would work better in California. And we shouldn't stop at state government. We should think about the whole structure of government because all the levels of government are tied together. What's magic about having 58 counties? We used to change county boundaries in the state all the time. The last time we changed one was in 1907 when my first county, Imperial, broke away from San Diego County. The last time we created a new county in California, 1907, over 100 years ago. Maybe we shouldn't have counties at all. Maybe we should talk about regional governments with multiplicity of powers. Maybe we should end these single-purpose overlapping agencies that we have. We should be willing, in other words, to start with a relatively clean sheet of paper and try to design a structure of government that allows decisions to be made, holds those making the decisions accountable for the outcome, and allows the consensus and the majority rather than single-purpose minority groups to prevail. It can be done. There's nothing unique, so unique about California that we could not govern ourselves with the proper structure. It's just incumbent upon us to find a way, perhaps through a constitutional convention, probably the only way that could be done, to design a structure of government that makes sense for California, not something that we just assume we always have to have, that has proven itself, that is not only doesn't work demonstrably, but cannot work. That's the important thing to remember. It cannot work. We cannot continue down it. If we do continue down this path, let me tell you what I think will happen. We will devolve further away from having a state with some community, sense of community, into a collection of tribes defined by geography, by economic standing, by ethnicity, by culture. And politics then will cease to be, probably already has ceased to be, the means by which we approach, define, and resolve our common problems into simply a way in which tribes conduct warfare on each other and try to prevent rival tribes from incursions upon their territorial domains. Does it sound familiar? Aren't we already headed down that path? The only way to prevent that from happening is to have a strong and effective state government. If we're going to be a state, we need a strong and effective state government. Thank you very much. And as Admiral Dewey said at the Battle of Manila Bay, fire when ready, Ridley.
Okay, we have time. We have time for a few minutes of questions, so if you want to come to the microphone and ask questions, that would be great. But in the meantime, Dan, there's a couple questions that were texted in from our text-literate audience. Let me start with the first one. What incentive do legislators have to call a convention?
There is no incentive for the legislature to call a convention. No organization will consciously overhaul itself when the people within that organization, it doesn't matter whether it's public, private, or governmental, or whatever, nobody within a system will consciously destroy the system and replace it with something else because they achieve success within the current system, the status quo, regardless of how illogical it is. That kind of reform, that kind of restructuring, that kind of true fundamental restructuring can only come from the outside. The legislature will never do it.
Okay, let's go to this microphone over here.
Yes, my name's Charlie McLean. I'm from Fresno. You made mention of the worst-case scenario with regards to the power initiative. That raises an interesting point because now in the financial situation, we're hearing about a technique that auditors use called stress testing. Do you believe that something like this could be built into a constitutional or governmental structure to avoid worst-case scenarios?
I don't know that you can ever avoid worst-case scenarios, but I believe that if you have a system that allows those involved in any particular issue to come to some sort of consensus, you will avoid the worst-case scenarios. It's only when you twist and tweak the issue so much to satisfy everyone that you're likely to come up with unworkable monstrosities. In other words, we have created a hyper-democracy in which everyone has a veto power, and in doing so, we have undermined true democracy.
Okay, thank you. And as you just did, the next speaker, Stephen, could you introduce yourself and where you're from as well when you ask the questions?
Thank you. Stephen Hill. I'm with the New America Foundation. Thank you for your comments, Dan. As I listen to them, I don't fear the changes that you're talking about. I fear that we won't be bold enough. And a lot of people like to invoke the founders and say what we have here is sacred because it was created by them. But actually, if you read the annals of the Constitutional Convention, you see that they were quite confused in what they were drafting. And they had numerous proposals throughout that hot summer of 1787 and rejected some, drafted more. And finally, when they came up with, for example, how we elect the president, it was just it was a method they came up with at the last minute because they had to finish up business.